Welcome back to Andersen Acres. We're in the kitchen tonight, and today what we are going to be making is an oatmeal bread. This is a tasty, delicious bread that is flavored with maple syrup instead of using any sugars, and it turns out just spectacular because that maple syrup is just perfect. So let's get started. The first ingredient you're going to need is some buttermilk. Now, if you don't have buttermilk, you can add milk to your measuring cup and then add about a tablespoon of vinegar to sour it, but buttermilk works better. But if you have to, substitute milk plus a tablespoon of vinegar. How much milk? You're going to want about a cup and an eighth, like 1 1/8 cup of milk. And if you have buttermilk, use buttermilk. If you don't, a little bit of vinegar goes a long way. So we're just pouring our buttermilk in there. Okay. Next ingredient we're going to need some butter. We're going to use about 2 tablespoons of butter. Yes, you can use margarine. My preference is almost always butter, but if margarine's what you've got, that's what you use. It's totally fine. Next up, you're going to need your maple syrup. Okay, you're going to want about 2 tablespoons of maple syrup. Just pour that directly in there. No, I'm not exactly measuring, but that's about 2 tablespoons. It doesn't matter that much. If it's only 1 tablespoon, that's fine. So 1 to 2 tablespoons of maple syrup and you're golden. Next up, you want half a cup of just regular oats. Okay, just your regular oats that you get in your cupboard. Just stick those oats in the pan, no big deal. Then you're going to want a teaspoon of salt. I happen to be using sea salt today, but you can use Himalayan salt or table salt or kosher salt or whatever you happen to have lying around. Next up is your flour. We are going to use 3 cups of just regular all-purpose flour, just regular white flour. Dump that in. And yes, I'm using my bread maker today. You can, of course, mix this by hand, or you can use your mixer, or you can use your bread maker. Either way, it doesn't matter. So now we're going to add 1 heaping teaspoon of yeast. I am using instant yeast. You can use traditional yeast if you're mixing it by hand or using your mixer, but I'm making it in a bread maker, so I'm using instant yeast. So like I said, you can make this by hand or in your mixer. Just make sure that you mix your dough, knead your dough, and allow your dough to rise at least once, because we will come back and shape this loaf when we're done. But I'm going to pop it in the bread maker, and for me that'll take about an hour and a half. If you're making it by hand, it'll probably take you about the same amount of time. Bread makers don't save you time, they save you effort. So we're going to pop this in the bread maker, and we will come back just as soon as our dough has completed its first rise. Remember, we do need to complete that first rise. All right, our dough is ready. It has completed its first rise. So it was mixed, kneaded, and completed 1 rise, but it needs a second rise cycle. So we are going to shape it into a loaf. First thing you're going to do is you're going to squeeze all that air out of it. Some people call it punching down, but I literally just squeeze it. I don't punch it. I just take it and just make sure there's no air in it. Okay, so once you're sure there isn't any air in it, you want to prepare your pan. Now I'm using this square loaf pan because this works really well for sandwich breads and toast. So that's the plan for me. You don't have to use a square pan, obviously. You can use a standard loaf pan, or you can just shape this loaf freely and let it rise on a cookie sheet. But I'm going to use a square loaf pan. It has a lid. So what we're going to do is we need to make sure that the bread doesn't stick, because it's going to bake in here, so we don't want it to stick when it's baked. So I'm going to use a vegetable oil cooking spray. This is actually a canola oil cooking spray. And I'm just going to use that to make sure it doesn't stick to my pan. Just going to do a light coating. You can use whatever you like. You can use butter and flour, whatever you use to make sure stuff doesn't stick. And I'm going to spray the inside of my lid as well. And then I'm going to take my dough, shape it into an oblong loaf that's just a little bit shorter than my pan, okay, just because we want it to rise to fill it. And we'll just place it in the pan. And because I have a lid for my pan, I'm going to slide this on, just like so. And I am going to set this aside to rise. So I'm going to pop it into the microwave. I'm not going to turn the microwave on, but a microwave kind of captures the heat and humidity, so this rises fairly quick. It'll probably take 45 to 60 minutes to rise. I'm going to check it frequently because I want it to be just shy of hitting this lid. So I'm just going to pop that aside and let it rise. You can let it rise wherever you like. You can cover your loaf with a damp tea towel and just let it rise wherever you normally let your breads rise. So we will come back as soon as this has risen. All right, our dough has risen up pretty nice. It is almost to the top. So because I'm using this square pan with a lid, I don't want it quite to be up there because we don't want it overflowing. So now we are going to bake it. It takes about 45 to 60 minutes for it to do its final rise. So now that it has completed, we are going to bake it at 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 20 to 25 minutes or until it's nice and golden. So we're just going to pop it in the oven as soon as my oven's finished preheating, which is in just a couple of minutes. And then we will come back when it is cooked and ready to come out of the pan. So join us for that. And there we have it, oatmeal bread. Now my loaf is square because I used a square loaf pan, but obviously if you didn't use the square pan, your loaf will be slightly different shaped. Now do remember to let this cool at least 20 minutes once it comes out of the oven before you cut it, because breads usually are not quite done cooking. They're still kind of roasting away in there. You don't want a gummy loaf. I did let it cool 10 minutes before I turned it out of the pan just to make sure it was properly set, but it baked for 25 minutes at 375 degrees Fahrenheit. It is delicious in the morning with a little bit of butter, nicely toasted, with a little bit of jam, or just really on its own. It's got a delightful maple flavor. That's about it for us here today at Andersen Acres. I do hope you enjoyed making oatmeal bread with us. We'll see you tomorrow.